How do you still maintain that connection with your Ukrainian heritage, in spite of everything going on with the war?
Yeah. It's interesting because that's in US, as we talked about, I still don't fully feel like I'm truly local here. I still have that a little bit of notes of like I'm a foreigner. But when I do travel internationally, like I went for my friend's wedding in Germany, and I felt very Texan in Germany. What is this? Actually, when I introduced myself to people, I kind of introduced myself as half Ukrainian, half Texan, even though I'm not by birth, but I've been here longer now than I was in Ukraine. So Texas has definitely integrated within me, within myself. And I think some of the things you talked about is what I love about Texas is when disaster strikes. And unfortunately, like I wish it would be more often, we didn't have to be a disaster, but people are helpful and it really doesn't. And I've seen that a lot.
Hey, greetings and thanks for tuning in to RAA Talks. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Raihana, like rye bread, and I'll be your host. I've got a great guest joining us today. We have Iryna Marchenko. Now, as we dive in, the first thing that you mentioned, of course, which was very intriguing for me as being an immigrant from Ukraine, with all the news happening around Ukraine, I thought it'd be a great way to just start from there and hear from somebody firsthand what that experience was like. So you mentioned you immigrated to the U.S. from Ukraine as a teenager. That was quite some time ago for you, I can imagine. Can you paint a picture for us of what that experience was like? What were some of the challenges that you faced in that journey?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think, so I remember the exact date that I walked out of the airport. It was October 20th, 2002, about a year after 9/11, which is, I guess affected some immigration, but I was 13 back then. So I didn't really know what my parents, what my mom went through and trying to work through the immigration documents. So I was kind of shielded from that. That was nice. So for me, my first impression of US was walking out of the Houston airport on October 20th, again, in my puffy winter jacket and my glasses. And I couldn't see anything. So it was so humid, and that was a shock to me. I'm like, what is this? I didn't realize, I don't know. I guess I just assumed everybody had seasons. I don't know. I never thought about it, that different areas, even though you go through that in geography class in school, you just don't think about it until you're actually somewhere else, And before that, I've never left Ukraine. So I barely left the area that I was in. So I didn't have travel experience or exposure to other cultures or places. So that was my first impression of being in the US. Another one was just how big the roads are and how many cars there are. That was so strange to me. Just seeing the big freeways. And then we passed like 2 accidents on the way. And it was just like, that's true what they say. Everything is bigger in Texas. Like everything just sounds so big. So those are kind of like my general as a kid, as a 13-year-old. Those were my impressions of the U.S.
That's so funny that you mentioned you've never traveled at all before leaving Ukraine. And then you come to the most diverse place in the U.S. where everything is big in the U.S. I remember when I went to Europe one time, the coffee was like the size that my uncle was saying, this is so small, I can fit it through the hole of my tooth. When Europeans come here, they're like, oh, they're overwhelmed with the size of things. Like they're just 10 times bigger. And you went to the biggest place that has everything bigger than any other state in the US. So that must have really been a shocker for you. How did you adjust to that? Like culture shock and seasonal shock. How was that for you as you navigated that?
Yeah, I think there is a level of excitement coming from a country where you just saw America on TV, Friends. I think I was a little too young to really understand and enjoy the show Friends, but we had the show Friends. And then Coca-Cola, Pepsi, watching Britney Spears. That was like, wow, Britney Spears, she's so amazing. If you're a millennial, right? Like that's your Madonna.
She's like the Taylor Swift of that era.
Yeah,
she's Taylor Swift of that era.
Yes. So for me, there was some sort of excitement, like I'm going to be so close to those people. Which, you don't think about how big US is. Texas is relatively comparative to the size of Ukraine. As a state, it's about the same size as the country Ukraine. And Ukraine's actually one of the, Now the borders are questionable, but it's one of the biggest countries in Europe. So it's an interesting fact many people don't realize. It's bigger than France and Italy and Germany. But yeah, that was kind of an exciting thing that I was thinking about. And then, of course, reality sets in. And you're like, wait, I'm not going to be like hanging out with Britney Spears on the weekends. Like, that's not going to happen. So it was interesting. Well, one of the things that was different was my classes in Ukraine were 45 minutes long. Here, it depends which school you go to, but for my middle school and high school, classes were an hour and a half. And I just remember how challenging that was to sit in one place for an hour and a half. And I bring that up because ADHD is such a kind of big topic now people talk about. And I just find it interesting that, yeah, it's not natural for us to sit in one place for so long and study one topic. And I think it depends. Now things have changed too. Teachers are more interactive with students. But to me, that was a big shocker and a big change. Another thing was in Ukraine, having a car at that time, at least, was an exception. Here, not having a car was an exception. And my family did not have a car. If we needed to travel to an immigration service agency, it was like we had to take 2 buses. It was like almost a 3-hour fare just to go one way. Driving, it would have been, 20, 30 minutes. But that was an adjustment that public transportation was not present. And Houston does have a pretty big bus system, but it's not as robust, and there's the long wait lines between buses. Food was different too, adjusting to, pizza and hot dogs is kind of like the common snacks. Common food available everywhere was different. I actually didn't like pizza before I moved here, but now I love pizza. Development as we grow, things kind of evolve as well. So
what kind of foods did you have in Ukraine? How different was it to give listeners an idea?
It was pretty basic. One food that I think is interesting that U.S. is lacking is buckwheat. So I don't know if you've ever had buckwheat.
What is that?
So it's like rice. It would be a side dish. So it's like rice, but it's actually very healthy for you, and it's supposed to be really good for your heart rate.
What did you say, buckwheat?
Yes.
Buckwheat. Okay, I thought you said something in Russian.
No, yeah.
It sounded a little bit different.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, buckwheat. Yeah. Okay.
So they have it, I think they sell it in like Whole Foods sometimes, but it's not the way they sell it in Ukraine and Russian stores. They not fried, but they roasted a little bit. So it has slightly different taste. I think in the Whole Foods, they don't roast it. So to me, it doesn't taste as good, but maybe it's just a preference. That was a common food. Potatoes is big. Potatoes and just meat, chicken or pork or beef, just your regular kind of. So it's not a very adventurous type of cuisine. There's more now. So I think when I talk about this was 2002. So internet was just coming to Ukraine. People don't really have computers. Very few people had computers. You don't have, Instagram. You don't have TikTok. You don't have that exposure to other cultures and other things in the world. And I think now it's more common. There's been more integration of different things, like sushi exists now. Back then, I've never heard of sushi. Mm-hmm. So it's just also a time to it'll.
How interesting.
Yes.
I heard you say a lot about how the highways and the size of things, the food were different things that you had to kind of adjust to. I'm wondering over time, because that was when you were really young. So these were the things that were important to you at the time. But as you grew up, how did you learn to adjust to a completely different system, people, culture in the country, knowing that you've never even experienced anything outside of Ukraine? How did you adjust as you grew up?
I think that just takes time and experience, and just living in the environment. One of the things that helped my stepdad was actually American. So at home, I was forced to speak English. I was forced to kind of learn that from my stepdad, from his experiences. And he was born in Texas, in Houston, or he was born in Palestine, Texas. And he's been a Texan his whole life. So kind of that shaped my perspective too, of what he was telling me. And I remember I would come from school, and we would just sit and talk for a long time. And honestly, I don't know how he listened to me for a long time because my English probably wasn't good. And just to listen to someone you talk, I don't even know what I talked about, but it was just very different for me to have that experience, because back in Ukraine, I wasn't super close with my dad. Like, he lived with us, but I wasn't super close with my dad. Here, my stepdad, he was actually disabled. He had type 1 diabetes since he was 9. So he lost his legs. He had prosthetics. He lost his vision. He was legally blind. So there were a lot of things that I learned through him. I know your podcast is kind of about resilience. And I didn't discuss that in, our session, but he really taught me that kind of resilience, because he's really been hit with a lot of health issues in his life, and he never gave up. He always had this kind of life. So I know the question was, how did I adjust? But I think he was kind of a pivotal character in my life to help me adjust and understand this kind of world better.
Wow. That's quite a role model you have at such a young age to kind of give you a different perspective on life. You talk about one perspective is moving your home completely from one place that's your comfort to a place that's totally foreign. And then on top of that, you're learning how to build resilience at such a young age, which sounds like an incredible person to learn from, given all the experiences he had. What's one takeaway that you learned from him at that time about resilience, and what does that mean to you today?
I think life is precious. That was a takeaway from him. And I don't think I realized that until recently, to be honest. Like, it probably implanted somewhere in me, but it never materialized into actual, like, hey, it makes sense. Like, it never clicked until recently, with kind of different changes in my life as I get older and I experience some. I'm realizing sometimes it gets difficult, and you just think, not that I don't want to give up, but you just think, like, what's the next? You get tired, right? You get tired and you just think, what's the next thing? And then I remember him and I realized, well, life is worth it. Life is precious. Like, this man never gave up, and he lived to be 72, which I think for somebody with his health condition is amazing and incredible. I mean, he had to give himself insulin shots every day by himself. He had to watch what he eats. Like, he couldn't do much, but he actually, it's interesting, but he decided at the end of his life that he wanted to live in Hawaii. That was like his dream bucket list item. So he left my mom and I, and he moved by himself to Hawaii. And this was a man, I think he was 64, 65 at that time. Again, who was legally blind, who has prosthetic legs, who has to give himself insulin shots every day. He moved and he lived by himself for, I think, 8 years or so, which is incredible. And, I'm sure for him, life was difficult. I can't imagine like having to give myself a shot every day or have to watch what I eat so tightly, but it was worth it for him, and he wanted to do it, and he did the things, probably was difficult for him to leave my mom and I, and it was difficult for us at that time, but now looking back, I really admire him for doing it.
I'm sorry for your loss, first and foremost. It sounds like you were given this great gift of his presence, of everything that you were able to learn from him. You're in this foreign place, and now suddenly he's the one person who is kind of like your guide in this foreign land is now gone because he moved. How did you and your mom navigate that journey? And what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I was already 21 or 22, so I was a little bit older. I just graduated from University of Houston. Go Cougs. I think you're a Coug as well.
Yes, go Cougs.
Yeah. I found a job, a corporate job at that time. And it was just kind of navigating and learning that adulting, right? Adulting by yourself, I guess. It was difficult for my mom because there was that partnership, and now she kind of had to figure things out. But she's always been super independent. So she's been one of my role models she's very resilient in different types of ways. And she sometimes we butt heads a little bit because we're both very independent in that sense. And it can be challenging, but I also learned from her not to ever rely on anybody. And I say that cautiously because I think we all need to have a support system, and hopefully most of us do. Sometimes we don't really realize that we do have a support system, whether it's your friends or your parent, even if you have sometimes challenges with the parent or somebody else in your family. I hope we all have a support system. So it took time. It was a transitional period in our lives, but it was a good period, and as challenging as it was, I think the biggest challenge was, and maybe we'll talk a little bit, is financial stability and financial. My mom worked at that time, but it was still, an extra income source that we lost as a family. So it was just a readjustment of how are we going to restructure what we do and how we do it.
Absolutely. And it was just you and your mom at the time?
So at that time, it was me and my mom. And then as I was getting older, I got a boyfriend who ended up moving in with us a little later. So he actually helped out with the rent as well.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. I was just thinking maybe you had other siblings. That's why I asked. So forgive me for probing. That sounds like another lesson in resilience. And on that note, so let's pivot to just focus on that element and a little bit about loss and loss of life, as you were also talking about that. You've experienced a profound amount of personal loss recently, specifically, including the loss of your sister, your beloved cat, and your stepfather, all within a very short period. And I can just imagine how much grief that is for you to just process all at one time. Speaking of resilience, how did you cope with such a devastating series of losses in your life?
Yeah. So the first loss I'll talk about was my cat. And I know it's a strange one, but it was the first time I truly lost someone who was so close to me. So this was a cat. She was 18 when I lost her, and she's lived with me since she was 4. She was actually my friend's cat. I said I would watch her until my friend finds her like a more permanent house because she was moving. And that cat stayed with me for, I guess, 14 years.
Wow.
And then I ended up moving for grad school at some points for 2 years, and I took her with me. And at that time, I just really bonded with her during those 2 years, that it was just me and her. So, and she got really sick at one point too, and I thought she wouldn't make it, and she made it. So it was just like, I don't know, it was just really deep connection. And I don't have children of my own, but I felt responsible for her. So when she ended up passing, I struggled with, do I take her to the vet? Do I put her to sleep? Or do I let her die naturally? Like, how do I process this? And I chose to let her pass naturally. And it was painful because she was not moving at that point, but she was, still alive. Hopefully that's not too much detail, but it was just an interesting discovery for me at that point in my own kind of mind, how I processed that and what it was. And I stayed like on the floor with her during the night that she passed, and I just put her next to my head so she knew my presence. And then I woke up when I heard her take her last breath. And that was really difficult because I watched her pass, and that really hit me. That was the first, like the closest I've been to death. I've lost grandparents before, but they were all in Ukraine. And at that point, distance creates separation. You don't have the same strength of feelings, but this was somebody really close to me, even though, it's a pet. Maybe some people don't fully feel that way, but that's how I felt in the moment, and I remember I just laid on the couch crying for 2 days. Like, that was so painful. And after that,
Did this happen when you were in grad school? So you were away from your mom and your home in the U.S.?
It happened actually when I moved back to Houston.
Okay.
And like a year after I moved back, or less than a year after I moved back, shortly after. And that kind of like set off. So it really kind of shook me to the core, feeling of responsibility and not having control of fixing someone or, really understanding the loss. And then after that, this was, I think, 21, I want to say, or maybe 2020. I don't fully remember now. I lost my sister in early 2022, January of 2022. She lived in Ukraine, and she's 10 years older than me. So we had a pretty big age gap. So one would think we weren't as close, but actually I felt really close to her. She was kind of like a mom for me, because my parents were working all the time. So I actually spent more time, and she was kind of that parental figure for me. At that time, when I lost her, there were signs that her health was declining. So it was kind of more prepared. And there was so much going on. This is again, January 2022. There was still COVID things happening with the travel, especially traveling was difficult. Talks of war in Ukraine, her passing also affect my mom deeply, right? Like that's her daughter, and there's things. And then also her son, my nephew, who lost his dad a couple of years before, now lost his mom. So there was just a lot going on at the same time that I didn't really have time to. It was more like, what do we do next? How do we move on? Like, what are the steps that we need? So it was very, I don't even know what the word is, but not transactional, but there was just a lot of things that we needed to take care of. So it didn't really hit me until a few months later, when we kind of figured out a few other things. And it was hard. It still is hard. It kind of comes and goes in waves, and it's weird because I haven't seen her too much before her passing. I saw her for the first time in 10 years in August of 21st, so a few months before she passed, but before that it's been like 10 years. So it's difficult, but at the same time I have these core childhood memories with her that really stick with you. And it was kind of like processing my own grief, helping my mom with her grief, and helping my nephew with his grief. So it's kind of figuring all of that out. And then a few months later, I learned of my stepdad's passing as well, who was in Hawaii at that time. And I lost my cat, who actually I got right after moving to the US. And so she's been with me since I was 13, also somebody who's been very close to me for 20 years. And at that time, I think you're just kind of like, okay, what's next? You kind of move through the motions. So I think when it hits you the first time, it's the hardest. And then you just kind of have exposure to it. And I don't know that you learn how to deal with it, but you just kind of accept it a little bit faster. Then sometimes things just hit you in waves, like thought crosses your mind, or you talk to someone, or you see a picture of something that just kind of hits you. So yeah, that's the story.
Wow. That, one thing that I kind of assessed from all that is grieving the loss of a pet or an animal sounds like it was different from losing a human, even though the common factor there is loss, right? Close to both of them, but still somehow it felt like the way you were describing it, you were more distressed by the loss of your cat compared to the loss of your family members. And it sounded like, because you mentioned you spend so much time with that being, right? I wouldn't say that it's not important because it's not a human, but that being was very important to you because of the relationship you had with that animal. And I'm curious about, did you actually just kind of figure out how to move forward, or was it, I'm just going to box all of this up when people started passing away for you? I feel like it's almost like you decided, I'm just going to stick everything I'm feeling, put it in a box and stick it away so I can focus on my now, because my now is not to process what I'm feeling or look at my thoughts around the situation and what's happening and give myself that space. But maybe I'll get to that later. But I wanted to just check with you. Am I hearing all that right and assessing that correctly? And how is that hitting you as I fed that back to you?
Yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily that I box things. I think it's more of how I prioritize things later on, right? When I lost my first cat, it was somebody I felt really responsible for. Like I was her guardian. I didn't save her, even though she was at the age, it made sense. With the passing of my sister, I saw how distressed my mom was. So for me, the priority became, how can I help my mom feel better? that was my priority. And it was because my mom lives in here with me. And I think it's that closeness again, right? You're physically more present with somebody. So that person you're more connected to that person naturally. And that became my priority. So it's not necessarily that I boxed it, but it's more like how I chose to prioritize my energy at that point.
Okay. So then one thing that came up for me is if that's how you decided to prioritize, then what do you think happened when these waves came up, right? Because that's when I was thinking, maybe she just decided this is not important for me to focus on right now. But then what triggered those waves? You said you'd see a picture or somebody mentioned something, and then you have these waves of emotion that come up related to that loss of life, whether it be your stepdad or your sister. What triggered those waves for you? And why did you think those came up if you were at the time prioritizing the most important thing for you?
Yeah, I think once you kind of get through, some time passes and I'm like, okay, well, I did everything I could with my mom to help her. Right now it's on her and she needs to process it in her own way. I did what I could with my nephew and now he has to process it in his own way. That's when I kind of felt like, well, now I have, maybe I can sulk a little bit in my own grief, give me that time. But I also don't want to do that too much because life goes on. It's you lose what you lose, but then what is still here, we have to continue to give that attention. What's here today.
Absolutely.
So that's how I set my mindset.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's one thing I wanted to end on really quick and just to kind of help listeners through this process and to add on to what you're saying. There's a book by Erin Dial. I hope I'm saying her name right. And it's called I See You. And when I read that book, there was a part that she was talking about her own personal story and how she experienced loss of life when going through IVF for pregnancy treatment. And she did it for several years. And she talked about how she just kind of moved forward. She was busy with her business and getting more speaking gigs and awards and just trying to make do and build bigger for herself. And she talked about how she just deprioritized herself in the process. And one day she just decided, and she describes this so vividly, and I'd invite anyone and you too, Iryna, to check it out if you're interested. She describes herself. She goes in a closet with a box of tissues and just starts crying. And someone said this earlier in another episode we recorded, that she just let herself feel all the feelings and the emotions. And after she did that, she just then described how, like, she took her multiple sessions of doing that, but in doing so, she felt different. She felt lighter and she felt like she was healed. And for me, that feels like, for your situation, having gone through so much grief, I'm just curious, how would it have been different for you if you would have given yourself that space that you needed, even though you're saying, oh, life goes on, you just keep moving? Absolutely. But I'm just wondering, how would it have been different for you if you would have taken a steps like something like what I just described? If you could imagine that, what do you think would have been different compared to how you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I read about grief, right? And there's all these articles about 4 stages of grief or 7 stages or however many stages. And I looked for it. I was like, what stage am I in now? What is this? Like, what is this? How would I describe it? And for me personally, right, it's different for everybody, but it don't really make sense. I couldn't really pinpoint what stage I'm in. And it wasn't like, I mean, it's now been a few years, so it's now been 3 years. I can't really, even looking back, I can't really divide it into specific stages of grief because they all kind of either came at once or you kind of get on with your busy day and you forget about it and you just don't think about it. And then you have maybe a downtime when you can allow yourself. I definitely had days when I cried and sometimes it felt like for no reason and sometimes it might have been a reason, right? Sometimes it's like your phone reminds you this picture from, 2 years ago. And you're like,
Absolutely.
But for me, I wish I had that moment where it was like clear to say like, on that day, this happened. And then I felt so much lighter. That hasn't happened for me. Maybe it will at some point. I don't know. But I feel like I've had mini versions of that. Like it's been more of like little sprints. Sometimes I feel better and it's great. And sometimes I don't. And that's okay. Like I've kind of learned that's just how it is for me anyways.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm curious if, somebody else has experienced the amount of grief or even more that you have experienced. What would you advise that they do to kind of process it? And as you mentioned, it's different for everyone. But having gone through that experience yourself, I'm wondering, what would you advise someone else if they're going through that situation and just not able to kind of focus on where they're at and move past where they're at right now?
I struggle to give advice here because it's going to be so different depending on type of relationship you've had with a person you lost or a pet. Or anything else, right? Sometimes grief might be losing your job, which we know a lot of people are losing their jobs, and it's a different type of grief, but it's still, I've seen it in friends and close people to me who lost their jobs. It's painful as well. So not to dilute anything, but I struggle to give advice because I think it's going to be very different for everybody. I think I guess to what you mentioned is give yourself that room to grieve and let yourself cry or just sit on the couch sometimes if that's what you need. And I've definitely done that as someone who's like a kind of a A-type personality. I'm like, no, I need to get up, and I feel so bad. Like, I'm like, no, but I want to do things, but at the same time I don't, right? And I think I've learned to, like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Sometimes if I do stuff, then I feel bad that I didn't give myself room to just relax and let myself be. And if I give myself room to relax and be, then I feel bad that I didn't go out and do more stuff and achieve more things. So I think that's just my state of being. And I'm still learning to accept it. I'm never going to be fully happy with where I'm at. So it's always, the grass is always greener on the other side, right? I have FOMO. I always have FOMO, fear of missing out on life and everything.
So did you ever guilt yourself after, like, if you gave yourself some time and space to kind of cope, whether it was for a couple minutes or...
I'm sitting on the couch watching TV or like watching YouTube, like, oh, why am I doing this? I really should get up and do laundry or clean. Like, I really need to do something. I should get moving. I should go out for a walk. So I do it during. It's not even after.
So how has that affected you? Like, having that mentality?
I think that's just me. I think that's just how I am, how I'm built. So I've learned to accept it. I think some people can be really present in the moment, and I think I can as well. I just I'm always thinking about what to do. What else is there?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And it sounds like maybe just the whole transition from your homeland to this new homeland might have had a part in that. And just with all the loss you processed, as you mentioned, losing your sister and your stepdad, like, you just had to figure out, okay, what are the next steps? So it sounds like you, like, as you mentioned, you're just kind of built that way. And if you're not operating that way, then it's like your mind is telling you, okay, you're not being Iryna right now. You need to be Iryna right now and just get on with the next thing. But again, go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting because you brought up, if my immigration had something to do with that. It's an interesting, there's certain survival instinct that you built immigrants because, and maybe could have mentioned this earlier, but just reflecting on some things, when I moved here, there were moments when people would tell me, don't do this or act differently because that's not how we act here. And I constantly felt like, oh, I don't fit in, or, I don't belong, or like I'm different. And nothing major, but small things. For example, I was in this Women on the Way Up group in high school, which was a really great organization and would expose women from immigrant families or families in poverty, so high school girls, to like ballet and opera and going to a nice restaurant. So I wore something that I was told, well, that's inappropriate, like that you should have worn like black slacks, and I only had jeans, at that was a cultural thing that I had to adjust to, like, oh, I didn't know, I didn't understand. Or going to a nice restaurant, I didn't finish my meal, and then I also some other girl for food to go. And these are minor examples, but it kind of plants a seed in your head, like, oh, well, what am I going to do or ask? Is that going to be culturally appropriate here or not? And I think that always sticks with you, even though I've been here for 23 years in the US, still have that. So some of that kind of resilience and moving on is I still need to fit in, and I still need to prove myself in this culture, in this, I still have an accent. Like, I never got rid of my accent. It's not going away at this point. My name is obviously not American in the traditional sense of American names. So there's still certain things that make me an obvious person who wasn't probably born here and grew up here. So I definitely have those experiences from my childhood that are still, I'm like, is this the right thing to do here? So, and I think some people struggle with who are not immigrants too, but just in my mind, right, it's like I'm always comparing myself, thinking I'm always fitting into this culture.
You know what's funny that you say, oh, I don't even have an American name. My name is not American, even though I was born here. So it's really funny, like people think of America, you have to have, like, Americans have light skin and they have like Smith as their last name and they live in big houses and, who knows these stories we all cook up about what it means to be an American. The real fact, we're all immigrants. Many of us who are light-skinned and look like the typical American of today's age and century have come from Ireland, have come from England, Italy, and it's just generations ago they've come here. So I would encourage you to be okay that you don't fit into this so-called American culture, because you being you is what makes the American culture. It's what makes Houston great. And one thing I love about Houston is everybody's so different and they have their own way of being. But the moment disaster hits, which happens quite frequently, everybody's like, I don't care how tall you are or how Republican you are or how dark skinned you are, I'm going to help you and you're going to help me and we're going to get through this together. And that's always the mentality. And to me, that's the real American mentality. Yeah. That it's not about what separates us. It's about what unites us. Isn't that why we're called the United States? So I'm curious about, now that we've had that little bit of that conversation and you talked about some of the insecurities you have, how do you describe your identity today?
That's a good one. I don't think I ever thought about this one. My thing, self-sufficiency is kind of at the core of my values, and I don't like to depend on somebody else. I like to be on top of things, and I like to know what's going on in the world. So I wrote down what's the quote? You're jack of all trades, master of none. But the full quote is, but oftentimes better than a master of one, right? So I'm definitely a jack of all trades. I'm very curious naturally as a person. So I like to dabble into things here and there. I don't necessarily have one thing I'm great at. Like, I'm not a swimmer, I'm not, a piano player, and I kind of wish I was. I think just staying curious, and I'm learning to appreciate that more about myself and finding more value in staying curious and being curious. And you brought up, how diverse Houston is. I love that. I love learning about different cultures. And even within one culture, you have so many diversities too. If you go to Ukraine, East Ukraine is very different culturally from West Ukraine, good or bad. Like, that's just the reality, right? And so I think just staying curious and open-minded to different things, and it's hard sometimes, right? Certain biases. Absolutely all of us have biases. That's just how human nature is. But it's having that openness to trying new things and seeing what else is happening, and kind of trying not to have judgment one way or the other.
Absolutely. That sounds wonderful. And it's interesting because when you said my identity is being self-resilient, self-sufficient and resilient, that didn't tie to either American or Ukrainian culture. I don't know if you noticed that. How did you feel about that? Not connecting your identity or your sense of identity to a specific country or the country's culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a survivor kind of mentality, right? I think I plant me anywhere and I'll find a way. Hopefully, I'll try anyways. So yeah, it's an interesting point you make that it's when we describe ourselves, we don't usually think about a cultural thing in what our name sounds, right? We think about how we feel today in the moment.
Absolutely. I would say people often associate it to a culture or associate it to a country, but I think you're very unique in not associating it. So that was very interesting. But talking about coming from Ukraine and now living and building in your life in the US, how do you still maintain that connection with Ukrainian heritage, in spite of everything going on with the war?
Yeah. It's interesting because that's in US, as we talked about, I still don't fully feel like I'm truly local here. I still have that a little bit of notes of like I'm a foreigner. But when I do travel internationally, like I went for my friend's wedding in Germany, and I felt very Texan in Germany.
What is that?
I actually, when I introduced myself to people, I kind of introduced myself as half Ukrainian, half Texan, even though I'm not by birth, but I've been here longer now than I was in Ukraine. So Texas has definitely integrated within me, within myself. And I think some of the things you talked about is what I love about Texas is when disaster strikes. And unfortunately, like I wish it would be more often, we didn't have to be a disaster, but people are really helpful, and it really doesn't. And I've seen that a lot. And I have friends from all sides of things, and I love that. And I, sometimes I'll not judge, but I'll hear things from one side and I'm like, okay, you know what it is. But it's also my curiosity, because I don't want to isolate myself from things I don't fully like, because I still want to learn from those things. Even if I might not like it, I still want to learn from them. So I never fully isolate myself from anything. So I still try to kind of stay connected to different sides.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah. It's funny. You were saying that you don't consider yourself a Texan and you've been there for over 20 years. You ask anybody that I talk to, the first thing I say when they ask me, oh, where are you from? I say, I'm a Texan.
Yeah.
And I'll kid you not, I've been there for less than 5 years. And I proudly say that. And I'd encourage you to self-reflect on this later on. But I think that when it comes to identity and belonging, nobody can write that narrative for you. You have to write it yourself. And it doesn't matter if you lived in Texas for 30 days or 50 years. If you believe that you're a Texan, then you show up as Texan. I lived many years of my life in California, and I will never tell you that I lived in California. I hate the place.
It's rare, yeah.
Yeah, it's very rare, right? So I'm like one of those rare birds who was just ready to get out. And I never thought I would ever go to Texas. And when I was there, I was just ready to leave as fast as I could. But the moment I left, I understood what people meant by Houston is home. And when I was there, I never understood it.
Yeah.
I never understood it. And I'm like, you guys are crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. The food is terrible.
Really? No, the food is like the best.
But you know what? And you don't know how that's relevant, right? You don't know how good it is until you have it somewhere else and it's not as good. Then you're like, okay, yeah, I need to go back. But for me, it was not so much about the food. It was the people. I'll kid you not, in the whole US, I never have found people who just care so much about you, no matter what you look like. I mean, I look like a complete foreigner. Like I don't even belong here, right? But even if that's the case, I've never been treated wrong when I needed help with something, whether it's getting some medication at a pharmacy or speeding up a delivery or something or the other. The people are always willing to go out of their way. And to me, that's where the true Southern hospitality that they talk about in the US, where that lies. It lies in Houston. But again, I would encourage you, explore more around that question. Like, what does my identity really mean to me? And how can I pull in, if you wish, some of that cultural or American or Ukrainian part of your heritage and somehow make that your own? And I'll tell you a quick story about myself. I've struggled with that question myself, for several years. I think about 25 years. I've struggled with that question. Who am I? Where do I fit in? And then it hit me. I don't fit in. I make my own room, my circle, whatever it is. I make my own space. I don't fit in. It is not possible by genetics, culture, because I'm a mixed bag. So if you try to fit me into one group, I never fit in. And I've just gotten so tired of trying to fit in. So what does it mean to be American when I was born here and people were discriminating against me? Like, go back to your country. Like, this is my country. I don't know any other country. Where's the people? Just because I dressed, like, what's matter to you? And so it became that, Raihana, it's okay You're a Latina and people don't accept you, that's okay. You're Caribbean, people don't accept you, that's okay. But you're a Muslim first, and you are going to hold that, all aspects of your identity, and you are going to uplift others to do the same. Because it doesn't matter that you don't fit in. It matters that we connect on different levels. And that's why the whole purpose of this podcast. Because as women, as a whole, we are connected in the different things that we experience. We don't have to look like each other. We don't have to have lived the same experiences. We don't have to be from the same country, speak the same language. Who cares if you have an accent? That is you. That's what makes you you. And that, I think if you were to kind of just shave off that accent, like if there was a day where you can live without your accent, I would argue that I don't think you would feel like your natural Iryna self. I would think you'd feel something's missing, just like I felt like something was missing when I left my home in Houston. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's true. It's our experiences are what shape us, right? So it's what you experience, what you felt, what you've, even those bad experiences that you mentioned, it made you more compassionate for others. And that's, I think, talking to you, you're definitely very empathetic. You learn to build that empathy. So sometimes having those negative experiences, they're terrible in the moment, but they actually help you be a stronger person, maybe not necessarily even stronger, but just to be able to relate and understand other humans in the world.
Absolutely. No, that makes so much sense. And that was a great pivot to our next topic that you were talking about, resilience, and kind of using those not so feeling good experiences to help you through other situations. And I know you mentioned, the loss of your sister led to you trying to figure out, what do I do with my nephew? How do I figure out things for him? And I think you said that was during the time of the war when things were really heated between Russia and Ukraine. So you ended up taking a significant role in your nephew's life, because you said you brought him to the US from the Ukraine and you became his guardian. Can you talk us through that transition and the different challenges that you experienced supporting this young teenager in a war-driven society?
Yeah. I mean, it was a really difficult time because, again, it was late COVID, but it was still COVID regulations during travel. He just lost his second parent, his most important parent, I would argue, his mom. And then he was in Ukraine, so there was no path for us to bring him to the US at that moment. There was a lot of different legalities we had to go through because my mom at that point didn't have an active Ukrainian passport. She would need to do that. That would take a lot of time. And then she would need to go through the court proceedings in Ukraine. That could take up to 6 months to officially become his guardian. My mom and I traveled to Ukraine after she came a few days before my sister passed, and I came a little after. I actually had COVID right before, so there was just a lot going on. So I had to wait so I could travel, and then I still had lingering effects. So it was just a lot. Almost every day, we would get calls from the Ukrainian Guardianship agency say like, oh, you need to work on this paperwork. You need to provide this or this. Otherwise, we're going to take him into the foster home. And, we don't want that, right? Especially when we're there. We don't want to give this kid to the foster home. And obviously, foster homes don't have the best reputation. I think no matter where you are, I think it's great that there are people in foster homes exist, but just, if you can't avoid that, right? You try to avoid that situation if you can. So anyways, there was just a lot going on. And this was January of 21. And the war was officially declared, or special operation was officially declared by Putin on February 20. So just a month after, and we didn't know what to do. Well, because I am a citizen, U.S. citizen, when you travel, you can input your information into this travel advisory board, and they'll actually, you can say where you're traveling, what dates. If something happens, they will call you, like the U.S. I don't know if it's embassy or the agency will call you and let you know. So I actually started getting calls like early February late January telling me, hey, we noticed you're in Ukraine. As a U.S. citizen, we recommend that you get out because things are looking like they're not going to be good. And so there's just a lot, as I mentioned. Eventually, we messaged the U.S. embassy, which there's embassy in Kiev, which is the capital. And we were on the far east side, like 12 kilometers from the front line of fighting. Actually, I was there during nighttime. I heard some sounds and I thought, I was like, who is lighting fireworks? Like, well, yeah, I don't see them. I didn't even realize at that time that we heard, even because the war has been going on since 2014, but it wasn't super active. It was kind of the boundaries of existing territory. So there was actually fighting going on. But anyways, we messaged to the embassy and said, hey, we have this child. He was 16 at that point, who just lost his parents, and we can't leave him. Like, we're not going to leave him. And if the US is calling us and telling us, like, get out, things are not looking good. Like, we can't leave this child. And we were able to get an emergency appointment in the US embassy, which was extremely lucky. So we rewrote to them a letter, and I forget who suggested it. It might have been my mom who said, like, let's just write them, because I kept looking online and they said we don't take appointments because it's COVID times. So that's kind of take a risk, ask, right? Sometimes it doesn't hurt to ask. And we went into the embassy, and that was stressful too, because we didn't print one of the forms that we were supposed to print. So we almost missed the appointment. We ran into like a nearby dental office, getting money so they could print one piece of paper. Got in just like 2 minutes after the appointment time, where he was able to get in, and I couldn't go in with him. And he went through an interview in the embassy, and they granted him like a tourist visa to come to the. We're like, that's good enough for now, right? Like, at least we can take him for now, see how things work out, what happens. Because everybody you talk to was like, there's not going to be war, there's not going to be war. But then you read all the news articles and you have the embassy call you like, hey, get out. You start to question things. So that's just a background of there's a lot.
So at that time, it was not that intense, it seems, when you were there.
Correct.
You got the loss, you're trying to get your nephew out. It wasn't that intense, but how did you feel when you were hearing that? What sounded like firecrackers to you was actually people being murdered in your country. How did you feel, if you remember what you felt or thought?
I didn't know that time. It wasn't until later when I was like telling my nephew or discussing something. He was like, oh no, that's the fight and it's happening on the territory. So that's just what they have been living with for the.
How did that affect him?
Exchanged hands, so to say. At one point in 2014, Russia did take control of the city, and then Ukraine got it back. So it's been under Ukrainian power legislation and since then, but it's always been at that point where very close to the border. But yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know. I was just, even when I went to Ukraine, I had to take a train from Kiev to Mariupol, which is where we live. It's 7 hours, and I remember just like laying and sleeping on the train and thinking, like, reading all the articles, right, about war is coming, and thinking like it could start now and my train could stop. The train tracks could be bombed. Like, I might not even make it to Mariupol, like, to see my mom and my nephew. My mom came a few days before me. It was just like, you didn't know. You didn't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I felt. It was just kind of, you don't know, but you got to do what you got to do, and you take that risk.
There you go. Your immigrant and survival instincts coming up again, that there are so many unknowns, but here there's even potential of your life even being at loss because you don't know when the war is going to start. Did you process that at all? Like, that your life could potentially be taken, even though you thought maybe the train would stop and I not see my family?
Yeah.
But did you ever think it could happen to you?
So my role has been kind of that face with law and understanding the processes. And I think my mom had a more kind of nurturing side to my nephew. So it's helped that we were both there and we had these different roles that we played, that we could divide and conquer the different areas of what we're doing and making the decisions too. Anyways, we were able to go through to fly to the US. That was, we landed, and then 4 days later, the war was declared, and Mariupol, the city we're from, was hit the first. So I started getting messages. I still have friends there, so I started getting messages from them. We have a group chat going, saying like, oh, we heard this, and we heard this. But that lasted for a few days, so 4 days, and then March 1st, everything went silent. So all the communications, everything went completely silent. And it wasn't until almost 2 weeks later that I heard from my friends that some of them walked on foot and left the city. Some of them found a transfer. Somehow, some of them stayed, but they had to boil snow. They were happy it snowed. They had to boil snow for water. They went to rivers to get water, but it made a lot of people sick in return. So it was just a very dark time during that time. And we were just very grateful. I just remember sitting on my couch and getting these messages from my friends and thinking like, oh my gosh, if we didn't leave, like this could have been like, even if I didn't go, right? If I didn't go, this could have been like my mom and my nephew stuck there and who knows, or worse. And I would just kill myself mentally with the thought of what is happening to them or what could have happened to them. So it's just so grateful that we risked it, I guess, at that point, and we were able to bring him home.
That sounds like quite a traumatic journey. And like you were saying, you were lucky to get the letter to the embassy. It's almost like you were lucky to get out at the right time too. We're at the end of our time together, and I hate to end it right in the middle of your story, but I'm just curious, how would you like to close this out, given everything that you shared, from losing family members, losing your pets, losing your homeland? What would you like to share to just close things out?
Yeah, I mean, it was, tomorrow is not promised, right? And I don't want it to end it on a gloomy note, but tomorrow is not promised to any of us. And it's a struggle. I honestly actually struggle now more because I'm thinking, do I save for tomorrow or do I live in the now and today, right? Because one of the things that I'm so grateful for and thankful for, that I had a good job that supported me and allowed me to take time off when all of this was happening. And two, I had savings that I could schedule a lawyer consultation. They're not free, that I could have, that we could buy tickets last minute, flights. And that's not a luxury, people can afford. So even though money doesn't buy you happiness, not having money also doesn't buy you happiness. And I don't want to make it about money, but having that security helps. And I recognize that a lot of people don't even have the luxury to save. So I think to end all of this, I would just say, enjoy today, but also be prepared for tomorrow. But also don't freak out if you don't have a full plan. Like, we're all just trying to figure this out. So take it day by day, right? Like, tomorrow is not promised, but if tomorrow does come, you want to be prepared for tomorrow as well.
Sounds like you just created your own version of the jack of all trades quote.
I guess so.
Like you were saying, that jack of all trades, master of none, but master of one is still there. So it's like, savor tomorrow, but make sure you're living in the present. But, just be prepared just in case there is a tomorrow. That's a beautiful way to end it. Thank you so much, Iryna, for your time and vulnerability and sharing your journey with us. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. And for folks, so sorry to say that we've come to the end of our time together, but before you go, be sure to subscribe to this podcast and make sure you give me a follow on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you have any requests for future topics or speakers, send me an email at Raihana@racoaching.com.
Thank you. This was, as I said, it was very therapeutic. It was interesting to reflect on things. I know I don't always have the most clear answers, but maybe that's just my side, like I can try to see both sides of anything that's happening. And I think, we're all just trying to make it through and enjoy what we have today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It was a nice way to wrap it up. All right. Thanks, folks. Tune into the next episode of RAA Talks.